The words hung in the air of my sterile beige recovery room, more suffocating than the scent of antiseptic. We emptied your bank account for your own good, Mom. My son David said it with a practiced gentleness, the kind of tone one uses on a confused child or a frightened pet. His hand rested on my arm, but there was no warmth in it, only the weight of his decision. Beside him, his wife, Sarah, nodded, her expression a careful mask of concern. "It's just temporary," she chimed in, her voice as smooth and cold as the tile floor. "With your surgery, all the bills, we didn't want you to worry. We're managing everything now." I looked from his face to hers, my own face likely as pale as the hospital sheets I was tangled in. I had just come out of a haze of anesthesia and painkillers after a hip replacement, a fall down the stairs I still couldn't quite remember. My mind felt like a dusty attic, memories stored in boxes I couldn't yet reach. They saw weakness. They saw an opportunity. They saw a signature they could obtain while I was still swimming in a fog of medication. I felt a tremor in my hand, but I stilled it. I let my expression remain blank, my eyes wide with the feigned confusion they expected. "My accounts?" I whispered, my voice raspy. "All of them?" David squeezed my arm lightly. "Don't you worry about a thing. We've set up a small allowance for your personal needs. We'll handle the mortgage, the utilities, everything. It's for your protection." Protection. The word echoed in the quiet room, a hollow sound. They were protecting my assets from me. I had spent 45 years building a life with my late husband, Robert. We started with nothing but calloused hands and a shared dream. We built a construction business from the ground up, brick by brick, deal by deal. I wasn't just the woman who kept the home. I was the one who balanced the books, who negotiated with suppliers, who saw the financial architecture of our future as clearly as he saw the blueprints. And now, my own children, the ones who grew up in the house built by our sweat and savvy, were telling me I was no longer competent to manage the fruits of that labor. Sarah handed me a glass of water, her nails perfectly manicured. "Just focus on getting better, Evelyn. That's all that matters." I took a slow sip, the water cool against my dry throat. I didn't argue. I didn't protest. I let them believe they had won, that the old woman in the hospital bed was as fragile as she appeared. I nodded slowly, a single tear escaping and tracing a path down my cheek. "Thank you," I breathed, letting my voice crack just so. "I don't know what I'd do without you." They exchanged a look, a mixture of relief and victory. They thought my tears were for my lost independence. They were wrong. The tears were for them, for the line they had just crossed, for the lesson they were about to learn. Because as they left the room, their footsteps echoing down the hall, my hand drifted to the small, old-fashioned key I wore on a thin chain around my neck, tucked safely beneath my hospital gown. It was a brass key, ornate and heavy, with the letter H for Hawthorne intricately carved into its head. Robert had given it to me on our last anniversary, his voice low and serious. "Evie," he'd said, his hand covering mine, "if they ever mistake your kindness for weakness, if they ever forget who built this family, you use this. Don't hesitate." They thought they had emptied my accounts. They had no idea they just handed me the reason to unlock our true fortune. They had forgotten about the one key my late husband told me never to use unless my back was against the wall. And in that moment, with their condescending pity still hanging in the air, I could feel the cold, hard steel of the wall they had just pushed me against. Robert and I didn't inherit our life. We hammered it into existence. I remember the early days in our small rental in Austin, Texas, the air thick with the smell of sawdust and ambition. He would come home, his hands rough and stained with wood polish, and spread blueprints across our tiny kitchen table. I'd sit beside him, my own fingers smudged with ink from the ledgers I balanced for a local hardware store. We were a team. He saw the structures, and I saw the numbers that made them stand. Good bones, Evie, he'd say, tapping a blueprint. A house needs good bones. He wasn't just talking about buildings. He was talking about us, about the family we were planning, about the legacy we hoped to leave. We saved every penny. Our date nights were porch swings with shared glasses of iced tea, not fancy restaurants. Our vacations were camping trips to Big Bend, with our young children David and Sarah sleeping between us in a tent under a blanket of stars. Every sacrifice was an investment, a brick in the foundation of the life we were building. The Hawthorne Construction Company started in our garage. Our first contract was a small residential remodel. I handled the payroll from a corner of the living room while bouncing baby David on my knee. Robert was on site from dawn till dusk. We grew slowly, then all at once. Our reputation for honesty and quality spread. We built schools, community centers, and finally, the sprawling suburban homes our own children would one day take for granted. By the time Robert's hair had turned to silver, we weren't just comfortable, we were wealthy. But we never lived like it. The house we built for ourselves was large, but not ostentatious. It had a wide porch for sunsets and a big kitchen for family gatherings. It was a home, not a statement. The week before Robert passed, he knew his time was short. The cancer had taken his strength, but not his foresight. He called me to his bedside, the room filled with the soft afternoon light he loved. He pressed the old brass key into my palm. His hand was thin, but his grip was firm. "This opens safe deposit box 713 at the downtown bank," he whispered, his voice a faint rasp. "There's nothing in there you'll need right away. No cash, no jewels. But there are documents, Evie, a living trust." He paused to catch his breath. "I set it up years ago. Everything, the company shares, the properties, this house, even the homes I bought for the kids when they got married. It all belongs to the Hawthorne Family Trust. You and I are the trustees. After I'm gone, you become the sole trustee." I remember frowning, confused. "But why, Robert? We have a will." He smiled, a faint sad curve of his lips. "A will can be contested. A trust is a fortress. I love our children, Evie. You know I do. But I've seen what grief and greed can do to a family. David is a good man, but he's soft. Sarah, his wife, she's ambitious. They see the branches, but they've forgotten the roots. They've forgotten the woman who balanced the ledgers in a cramped apartment so their father could chase a dream." He squeezed my hand. "This key, it's your power. As long as you are the sole trustee, nothing can be sold, transferred, or refinanced without your signature. They don't know about it. There's no reason for them to, unless—" He didn't have to finish the sentence. "Never use it unless you have to, Evie. But if they ever make you feel small in the house you helped build, you walk into that bank and you remind them who holds the blueprints." I tucked the key onto a chain, promising I would keep his secret. For 5 years after his death, I never thought of it. I grieved, I healed, I supported my children, and I trusted them. It was a trust Robert had foreseen might be broken. And as I sat in that hospital bed, their empty words of protection still echoing, I finally understood the profound, heartbreaking wisdom of his last gift. He hadn't just left me a key, he had left me a shield. The disrespect didn't start with the empty bank accounts. It had been a slow erosion, like a riverbank crumbling away grain by grain, so gradually you don't notice until the ground beneath your feet gives way. After Robert died, I moved into the in-law suite we'd built onto the back of the main house. It was my space, filled with my books, my photographs, and the quiet rhythm of my own life. At first, they were grateful. "It's so good to have you close, Mom," David would say. Sarah would bring me a cup of tea in the evenings. But as the years passed, the space between their world and mine widened. It began with small things. My opinion, once sought on everything from investments to garden layouts, was now politely ignored. I'd suggest a more durable roofing material, and Sarah would smile sweetly and say, "Thanks, Evelyn, but we've consulted a professional." They forgot I was the one who had hired and vetted every contractor for our company for 20 years. Then came the holidays. Thanksgiving dinner, a tradition I had hosted for 3 decades, was moved to Sarah's mother's house. "It's just easier, Mom," David explained over the phone. "Her place is more modern, better for entertaining." I wasn't told until the day before. I arrived with my signature pecan pie, the one Robert used to rave about, only to find there was no room for it on the dessert table, already crowded with store-bought cakes. I was seated at a small table with the younger children, like an auxiliary family member. I was no longer the matriarch. I was a guest in the life of the family I had raised. My name slowly vanished from their conversations. It was no longer, "Mom thinks we should," but I was talking to a financial advisor, or my friend who's an interior designer said. I became a silent background presence, the woman who made sure the pantry was always stocked, who quietly paid the landscaper when their checks bounced, who hemmed their children's school uniforms late at night. My contributions were absorbed into the fabric of their lives without acknowledgement, like rain into dry soil. One evening, I overheard Sarah on the phone with one of her friends, her voice dripping with condescending pity. "Oh, Evelyn is still with us," she'd said with a light laugh. "She's a bit lost without Robert, you know. It's a full-time job just making sure she remembers to take her vitamins. We have to handle all the important things, of course." The important things were the finances I had managed since before she was born. I stood in the hallway, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I had given them their first business loans from our personal savings. I had co-signed the mortgage on their modern home. But in her narrative, I was a doddering old woman, a liability they graciously managed. The final cut, before the surgery, was a conversation about the family vacation to Italy. I had been dreaming of it for years. "We'd love to take you, Mom," David said, avoiding my eyes. "But the walking tours are quite strenuous, and with your hip, we just think it would be too much for you." They went without me. I saw the pictures on Facebook, my children and grandchildren posing in front of the Colosseum, smiling, a perfect family unit. There was a photo of them at a vineyard, raising glasses of wine. The caption read, "To family, making memories that will last a lifetime." I wasn't a part of that lifetime. I was a memory they were choosing to store away. My fall down the stairs was an accident, but their reaction to it was not. It was a culmination. They saw my physical vulnerability as the perfect excuse to enact the final stage of my erasure. By taking control of my finances, they weren't just managing bills. They were seizing control of my story, rewriting it to cast me as the helpless old woman they needed me to be. They had forgotten that the woman who had fallen was the same woman who had helped them rise. They had forgotten who held the blueprints, and they had most certainly forgotten about the key. 2 weeks after my surgery, they brought me home, about the key, not to my in-law suite, but to the guest room in the main house. "It's closer to the kitchen, easier for us to check on you," Sarah said, her smile never faltering. It was a pretty room, but it wasn't mine. My books were in boxes. My photos were gone. I was a patient in my own home. I waited, playing the part they had assigned me. I moved slowly, leaning heavily on the walker. I asked them about my bank balance with a look of practiced confusion, and I thanked them profusely for the small allowance they deposited into a new account they controlled. "I don't know what I'd do without you," I'd say, watching the satisfaction settle in their eyes. They thought they were so clever. They never once checked the thin chain around my neck. The following Tuesday, I told them I had a follow-up doctor's appointment. David offered to drive me, but I insisted I take a cab. I need to feel a little independent, I said with a frail smile. Just this one thing. He relented, patting my hand. Of course, Mom, just be careful. The cab didn't take me to the doctor's office. It took me to the imposing granite building of Austin First National Bank downtown. The lobby was cool and quiet, the scent of old money and polish hanging in the air. I walked, not with my walker, but with my cane, my steps slow but deliberate. At the safe deposit vault, the attendant, a young man with kind eyes, looked at me with a professional's sympathy. "Can I help you, ma'am?" I slid the old brass key across the marble counter. "I'd like to access box 713, please." He checked his records, then my ID. He led me through the heavy, circular vault door into a silent, brightly lit room. The air was still and cold. He retrieved a long metal box and placed it on the table in a private viewing booth, leaving me with a quiet, "Take all the time you need." My hands trembled as I unlocked it. The lid opened with a soft hiss. Inside, there was no velvet, no stacks of cash, no glittering jewels. There was just a single, thick, leather-bound folder. Its title was embossed in gold, The Hawthorne Family Trust. I lifted it out. It was heavier than it looked. I opened the folder, and the world shifted. Page after page of legal documents, signed and notarized years ago. The first page was a declaration of trust, naming Robert Hawthorne and Evelyn Hawthorne as co-trustees. The second was a schedule of assets. My breath caught. It listed everything: the shares in Hawthorne Construction, now a publicly traded company, the deed to our family home, the deed to David and Sarah's 5-bedroom house in Westlake, the deed to the small condo we bought our daughter when she moved to Dallas. All of it, every significant asset, was owned not by us, not by them, but by the trust. I flipped to the last page, the one detailing the line of succession for the trustees. In the event of the death of Robert Hawthorne, sole power and authority as trustee would be transferred to Evelyn Hawthorne, unilaterally and irrevocably. My signature was there, beside Robert's. I ran my finger over his name, the ink slightly faded, but the intent as clear as the day he signed it. They thought they had seized control of my checking account, my savings. They were fighting over pocket change. I held the entire fortress. I closed the folder, a slow, calm smile spreading across my face for the first time in months. I didn't feel anger or even a desire for revenge. I felt a profound sense of clarity, the quiet, unshakable power of a promise kept. Robert hadn't just given me a key. He had given me the last word. I took out my phone and snapped a picture of the first and last pages of the trust document. Then I locked the box, returned the key to its chain, and walked out of that vault, no longer a frail old woman, but the matriarch of a family who had forgotten who was truly in charge. The game had changed. They just didn't know it yet. The law office of Miller, Finch, and Hayes was exactly as I remembered it from the days Robert and I had our wills drawn up, the scent of leather and old paper, the quiet dignity of dark wood paneling, and the reassuring presence of Arthur Miller. Arthur had been Robert's friend since they were boys, and he was the only lawyer we ever trusted. Now in his late 70s, his hair was white, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. I had called him from a payphone after leaving the bank, not wanting to use my own cell, which I suspected Sarah monitored. "Arthur," I'd said, "it's Evelyn Hawthorne. I need to see you. It's about the trust." He didn't hesitate. "My office. An hour." I sat across from his large mahogany desk, the leather-bound trust document laid between us. I had retrieved the original from the safe deposit box. Arthur read through it in silence, his expression shifting from professional curiosity to a grim, focused intensity. He looked up at me over the rim of his reading glasses, his gaze piercing. My God, Evie. Robert was a fortress unto himself. This is ironclad. They don't know, I said quietly. They emptied my personal bank accounts. They think they're managing my affairs while I recover from surgery. Arthur let out a long, slow breath and leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. They're playing checkers while Robert has left you the entire chessboard. According to this, as the sole trustee, you have complete control over every asset listed herein. That includes the sale, lease, or transfer of their own homes. They are, in essence, tenants in houses that you control. A wave of dizziness washed over me, the full gravity of the situation settling in. What do I do, Arthur? He leaned forward, his voice low and firm. First, we resecure your personal finances. I'll draft a cease and desist letter and a demand for the immediate return of your funds, citing fraudulent use of power of attorney, which I suspect they had you sign under duress. I nodded, remembering the stack of papers Sarah had brought to the hospital. They said it was just to pay my bills. A common tactic, Arthur said with a grimace. Next, we formalize your position. We will send a certified letter to David and Sarah, along with a copy of the trust's declaration page. It will inform them that as of this date, all financial decisions regarding the properties they inhabit and any dividends from Hawthorne construction stock must be routed through you, the sole trustee. The plan was bold, direct. It was a declaration of war, but a quiet legal one. They will be shocked, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Good, Arthur replied without missing a beat. Shock is a prelude to understanding. They need to understand the line they've crossed. This isn't about revenge, Evie. This is about restoring order and protecting you, just as Robert intended. He was right. This wasn't about punishing them. It was about reminding them of the truth. I had never been a burden. I had been the bedrock. There's one more thing, I said, my resolve hardening. I don't want to evict them, not yet. I want them to understand what they've done. I want to give them a choice. Arthur raised a bushy eyebrow. What kind of choice? I took a deep breath. I want to call a family meeting at my house. I will let them believe I am defeated, that I am there to beg for their help. I want to hear them say, in their own words, what they think of me. Then you will arrive. A slow smile spread across Arthur's face. He recognized the strategy. It was a move Robert would have made, a carefully laid trap, sprung not with anger, but with undeniable truth. It's a bold play, Evie. Are you sure you're up to it? I met his gaze, my own eyes clear and steady. Arthur, I said, a hint of steel in my voice. They may have forgotten who I am, but I haven't. He nodded, reaching for a fresh legal pad. All right then, Evelyn, let's draft the invitations. I walked out of his office an hour later, the weight in my heart replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for my children to walk into it. The trap was set. The family meeting was scheduled for Sunday afternoon. I chose the main house, my house, as the location. It was a subtle assertion of power they wouldn't yet understand. I spent the morning preparing, moving with a slowness that belied the racing of my heart. I made a pot of tea and set out a plate of Sarah's favorite lemon cookies, a peace offering that was anything but. I sat in Robert's favorite armchair in the living room, a thick Afghan draped over my lap, the picture of a frail, convalescing mother. I had my walker positioned beside me. They arrived at 2:00 sharp, their faces a mixture of impatience and condescending sympathy. David kissed my cheek, a fleeting, dutiful gesture. How are you feeling, Mom? You look a little tired. I am tired, I said, my voice deliberately weak. That's why I asked you here. I need to talk about my finances. Sarah sat on the sofa opposite me, crossing her legs elegantly. We've told you, Evelyn, there's nothing to worry about. We're handling it. The allowance we set up should be more than enough for your little expenses. But it's not just the allowance, I said, looking down at my hands, twisting a loose thread on the Afghan. I saw my bank statement. It's empty. Everything we worked for, Robert and I, it's all gone. David sighed, the sound heavy with manufactured patience. Mom, we explained this. We moved the assets to a more secure account under our management. It's for safekeeping. Given your recent health scare, we can't risk you making any rash decisions. Rash decisions? I looked up, letting my eyes fill with tears. You mean like donating to the church? Or helping my old friend Margaret with her medical bills? Sarah cut in, her tone sharp. Exactly. That's precisely the kind of sentimental spending that can drain a nest egg. We are thinking of the long term, of the family's legacy. The family's legacy. My legacy. I took a shaky breath. But it's my money. I worked my entire life for it. I balanced the books for Hawthorne Construction while you were still in diapers, David. I deserve to have a say. And you will, David said soothingly, as if speaking to a toddler. But right now, you need to rest. Let us take care of the heavy lifting. We're younger. We understand the market. It's a different world now, Mom. Sarah leaned forward, her expression softening into a practiced look of compassion. Evelyn, we love you. This is why we're doing this. Think of this as your retirement. You've earned the right to not have to worry anymore. The words were wrapped in the language of love and care, but their meaning was clear. You are irrelevant. You are a child. We are in control. I pressed a hand to my chest. So I have no access to anything? We will provide for you, Sarah said firmly. Anything you need, you just have to ask us. It's simpler this way. I let a moment of silence stretch, thick with their self-satisfaction. They believed they had me cornered, that I had called them here to plead. They were so confident in their power, so sure of my weakness. So, if I wanted to, say, sell this house, I said, gesturing around the living room, I wouldn't be able to. David actually chuckled. No, Mom, of course not. The deed, the mortgage, it's all tied up with the estate finances now. We've consolidated everything. It's far too complicated for you to handle. He was lying, and he was doing it so effortlessly. They hadn't touched the deed. They couldn't, not without the trust. They were bluffing, assuming I was too frail to check. I looked from my son's confident face to my daughter-in-law's smug smile. They had said everything I needed them to say. They had revealed their greed, their disrespect, and their profound underestimation of the woman sitting before them. I gave a small, defeated nod. I see, I whispered. I suppose you're right. Just then, the doorbell rang, a clear, sharp chime that cut through the tense quiet of the room. David frowned. Chime. Are you expecting someone, Mom? I am, I said, my voice suddenly clear and steady, all trace of weakness gone. That would be my lawyer. The moment Arthur Miller walked into the living room, the atmosphere shifted. He was an imposing figure, not just in stature, but in the sheer weight of his presence. He carried a worn leather briefcase and wore an expression that tolerated no nonsense. David and Sarah stared, their faces frozen in disbelief. Arthur? David stammered. What are you doing here? Arthur didn't acknowledge him. His eyes were fixed on me. He gave a slight formal nod. Evelyn, I trust you are well. I am now, Arthur. Thank you for coming, I said, my voice resonating with a strength that made Sarah flinch. Arthur placed his briefcase on the coffee table and opened it with a decisive snap. I believe there has been a significant misunderstanding regarding the management of the Hawthorne estate, he began, his voice calm and authoritative. Sarah found her voice first, a high, brittle sound. There's no misunderstanding. We are managing my mother-in-law's finances for her own good. She's been unwell. Indeed, Arthur said, pulling out a thick leather-bound document. So unwell, in fact, that you felt it necessary to fraudulently obtain power of attorney and liquidate her personal accounts, a matter we will address separately. He let that hang in the air for a moment before continuing. However, the primary issue today is one of ownership. You seem to be under the impression that you control the assets of this family. David stood up, his face reddening. We are the beneficiaries of my father's will. We are protecting our inheritance. Ah, the will, Arthur said, a flicker of a smile touching his lips. An interesting document, but in this case, entirely superseded by this. He slid the heavy folder across the table. This is the charter for the Hawthorne Family Trust, established by Robert Hawthorne in 2010. I'm sure you'll find it fascinating reading. Sarah snatched the document, her hands trembling as she opened it. David leaned over her shoulder, his eyes scanning the first page. I watched their faces change, moving from confusion to dawning horror. The color drained from David's face. Sarah's mouth opened, but no sound came out. As you can see, Arthur continued, his tone as cool as a courtroom verdict. All major assets, including Hawthorne construction stock, this property, and the home you currently reside in, David, are held by the trust. Robert and Evelyn were the co-trustees. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Following Robert's passing, Evelyn became the sole, and I must emphasize, sole trustee. Every decision regarding these assets is hers, and hers alone, to make. Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes wild. That's impossible. We would have known. Apparently not, Arthur said dryly. Robert was a wise man. He believed in preparing for all eventualities. David sank back onto the sofa, his body slack with shock. The house, my house, it's in the trust? It is, Arthur confirmed. Technically, you and your wife have been living as non-rent-paying tenants in a property owned by a trust that your mother controls completely. She has the legal authority to sell it, lease it, or, should she choose, evict you with 30 days' notice. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by Sarah's sharp, ragged breathing. All their power, all their carefully constructed control, had vanished in an instant. They weren't managers, they were dependents. They weren't in charge, they were at my mercy. I looked at my children, truly looked at them. Their arrogance had been stripped away, leaving behind raw, ugly fear. You told me I had an allowance, I said, my voice quiet, but cutting through the silence. You said you were managing things. You told me I couldn't sell my own house. David couldn't meet my eyes. He stared at the floor, his face a mask of shame. Sarah finally spoke, her voice a choked whisper. Mask of shame. We were just trying to help. No, I said, standing up from my chair, leaving the Afghan and the walker behind. I no longer needed them. You were trying to erase me. You mistook my love for incompetence and my silence for consent. You were wrong. Arthur closed his briefcase with another sharp snap. My client, Mrs. Hawthorne, has instructed me to inform you that access to her personal accounts is to be restored in full by the end of business tomorrow. As for the trust, he looked at me. Evelyn has a few new terms she'd like to discuss regarding your living arrangements. The trap had been sprung. The fortress Robert built had held, and I was finally home. In the days that followed, a new kind of silence settled over the house. It wasn't the silence of dismissal anymore, but one of tense, uncertain waiting. David and Sarah moved around me like ghosts, their faces pale, their voices hushed. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely upended. They no longer saw me as a frail old woman to be managed, but as the formidable matriarch who held their futures in her hands. The money was returned to my account within 24 hours, as Arthur had demanded. But that was just the beginning. I called a second family meeting the following Sunday. This time, there were no cookies, no pretense of a frail mother. I sat at the head of the dining room table, the same spot Robert always occupied. I had the trust document in front of me. Arthur sat quietly at my side. "We need to establish some new ground rules," I began, my voice clear and firm. "You will continue to live in your homes for now. However, you will no longer be living there for free." I slid 2 documents across the polished wood. "These are lease agreements. You will pay fair market rent to the trust each month. The funds will be managed by Mr. Miller's office and will be used for the upkeep of the properties and for a new charitable fund I am establishing in Robert's name." Sarah stared at the paper as if it were poison. "Rent? In our own home." "It is not your home," I corrected her gently. "It belongs to the trust. You are tenants. Consider it a lesson in the cost of living." David nodded slowly, his eyes downcast. "We understand, Mom." "Furthermore," I continued, "you will both attend financial literacy and elder care ethics counseling. Arthur's office will provide you with a list of approved counselors. Your compliance will be a condition of your tenancy." Sarah opened her mouth to protest, but a sharp look from David silenced her. They had no choice but to agree. The final condition was personal. "You will no longer make decisions for my own good. My health, my finances, and my life are my own. You will treat me with the respect that a mother and the head of this family deserves. We will have dinner together, here, every Sunday. And we will talk honestly about our family, not the one you tried to create, but the one we must now rebuild." For the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine remorse in Sarah's eyes. A single tear rolled down her cheek. "I am so sorry, Evelyn," she whispered. "It was a start. I didn't rebuild our family out of spite. I did it with the same careful planning Robert and I used to build our business. I established the Robert Hawthorne Foundation for Elder Justice, funded by the rent from the properties and dividends from the trust. Our first project was providing pro bono legal aid to seniors who had been victims of financial exploitation by their own families. I found a new purpose, a new fire. I was no longer just a widow or a mother. I was an advocate. David and Sarah began their counseling. The change was not immediate, but it was real. They started calling, not to manage me, but to ask about my day. David began helping me in the garden. Sarah, hesitantly at first, started asking for my old recipes. They were learning slowly that family is not about control, but about connection. One afternoon, months later, I was sitting on the porch when David came and sat beside me. He was quiet for a long time, just watching the sunset paint the Texas sky. "Dad was smart," he finally said. "He knew. He always knew you were the strong one." "He knew we were strong together," I replied. "The strong one. And he knew a family's foundation is built on trust. When that cracks, you have to rebuild from the ground up." I no longer needed the brass key that hung around my neck, but I never took it off. It was a reminder, not of betrayal, but of foresight, of love, and of the enduring strength of a woman who refused to be erased. They had tried to write me out of my own story, but they forgot one crucial detail. I was the one holding the pen.